The wind did not howl. It screamed. It was a raw, high-country scream that clawed at the mountainside, ripping the last of the autumn leaves from the aspens and promising a winter that would kill. The storm had come in like a bandit, all fast and violent, spitting sleet that turned to a blinding, thick snow. Clara did not know where she was. She only knew where she was not. She was not in the church. She was not in the wagon. She was not in the grasp of Jedediah Stone, the man who had bought her, the man who called himself her husband. She ran. The white silk of her wedding dress, a thing she had despised the moment her father forced it over her head, was now her enemy. It was torn to ribbons, snagging on every branch of spruce and rock pine. The lace at her hem was heavy with mud and ice. Her feet, clad in thin church shoes, had lost all feeling miles back. But it was the pain in her back that kept her moving. It was a single hot line of fire that burned from her shoulder blade to her hip. Mr. Stone had been a patient man. He had waited until the preacher was gone, until they were in the carriage. He had smiled when she'd fought him, when she'd told him the wedding was a sham, that she would never be his. His patience had snapped. The buggy whip was coiled on the floor. He had used it only once. One time was enough. The wound was bleeding. She could feel the warm blood freeze against her skin, gluing the ripped silk to her back. Behind her, she heard it, or maybe she just imagined it. A sound that was not the wind, a man's shout, the baying of hounds. They were looking for her. Mr. Stone did not pay for property just to let it run off. "Please, God," she whispered, her words stolen by the blizzard. "Just let me die here. Do not let him find me." She broke through a stand of lodgepole pines and tumbled, sliding down a steep embankment, her hands digging into the snow and frozen dirt. She landed hard on a flat expanse of land. The wind was less. She was in a valley, a small bowl cut into the mountains. She got to her knees, shaking so hard her teeth felt loose. Through the curtain of snow, she saw a shape, dark, solid. A cabin? And next to it, a barn. It was the last bit of hope in a world that had none. She did not think about who was inside. She did not care. She only cared about the wind and the hounds. She crawled toward the barn. It seemed a mile away. Her body was a dead weight. The cold was inside her now. A deep, heavy sleepiness that told her it would be so easy to just lie down. She reached the barn door. It was heavy, solid wood. She found a gap, pushed her frozen fingers in, and pulled. It scraped open just enough for a body to slip through. The smell hit her first. Hay, animals, warmth. It was the smell of life. She fell inside, onto the dirt and straw, and with her last bit underscore of strength, she pulled the heavy door shut behind her. The sound of the wind died to a low moan. The darkness was total. Clara let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 20 years. And then the world went away. Eli Morgan did not like surprises. His life was built on a routine that kept the memories at bay. He woke before the sun. He made coffee. He checked his traps. He fed his 2 horses and the milk cow. He chopped wood. He ate. He cleaned his rifle. He sat. The war had taken his desire for company. The winter 2 years after that had taken everything else. He had buried his wife, Sarah, and his son, little Thomas himself, right out back under the pine. The ground had been frozen solid. It had taken him 3 days with the pickaxe. After that, he had stopped talking much. There was no one to talk to. The storm made him uneasy. It was too early, too violent. It meant a long winter. It meant more time alone inside his own head. He pulled on his heavy coat and grabbed his rifle. He did not go anywhere without the rifle. He had to check the stock. The wind was bad enough to drift over the fence line, and the horses were skittish. He pushed his way through the snow to the barn, his boots sinking deep. He unlatched the door and shoved it open. He smelled her before he saw her. It was a strange smell beneath the hay and the manure. It was perfume, and whiskey, and something else, blood. His rifle was up in an instant. His eyes scanned the shadows. He was expecting a man, maybe a drunk drifter from the mining camps, or worse. Then he saw it, a pile of white. He kicked it with his boot. It was soft. He knelt, rifle still aimed, and squinted. It was a woman. She was lying face down in the muck, her hair the color of corn silk, matted with mud and bits of straw. She was wearing what was left of a fancy white dress. Eli's face hardened. He was miles from any town. The only women who wore dresses like that and smelled of whiskey were from the saloon in Durango. He reached down, grabbed her shoulder, and rolled her over. She was young, younger than he'd thought. Her face was bruised, her lips blue with cold. A heavy, gaudy ring with a blue stone was on her left hand, a wedding ring. He scoffed. A whore, then, or a thief, run off from a wedding, maybe, stole the ring. He checked her for a weapon. Nothing. He saw the way the dress was stuck to her back, the dark stain of frozen blood. He was annoyed. This was a complication he did not need. He was not a charitable man. Not anymore. But he was not a murderer, either. He could not leave her here. She would be frozen solid by morning. With a heavy sigh that sounded like grinding rocks, he set his rifle against the wall, bent down, and lifted her. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of wet rags and cold bones. He carried her out of the barn, the wind hitting them both like a slap. She moaned, a low, animal sound. He ignored it. He kicked open the door to his cabin and carried her inside. The place was one room, clean but empty. A fireplace at one end, a small cast-iron stove, a cot against one wall, a table, and 2 chairs. He did not put her on his cot. He laid her on the bearskin rug in front of the hearth, not gently. He stoked the fire, adding logs until it roared. Then he went to the stove, lit it, and put a pot of water on to boil. He stood over her, looking down. She was a problem he did not ask for. Her breathing was shallow. She woke with a gasp, her eyes flying open. They were wide with a terror so pure it made him take a step back. She scrambled backward, crab-walking until she hit the wall, pulling the torn dress around her. "Where am I?" she whispered. "Who are you?" "You are in my cabin," Eli said. His voice was rough from disuse. "You collapsed in my barn. You will freeze to death if you go back out there." She stared at him. He was a big man, broad in the shoulders, with a thick beard that was more gray than brown. His eyes were the color of a frozen lake. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "I will not be trouble. I can work. I can earn my keep. I just need shelter, just until the storm passes." Eli looked at her. Her hands were soft, white, despite the dirt. They were not working hands. The ring on her finger flashed in the firelight. He figured she would steal his food and be gone the first chance she got. "We will see," he said. He nodded to the pot. "Water's hot. You need to get out of those wet things, and you need to clean that wound." He turned his back to her, a gesture that was not about modesty but about disinterest. He went to a small, locked chest in the corner, took a key from his pocket, and opened it. He pulled out a gray flannel nightgown. It had belonged to Sarah. It was shapeless and thick. He tossed it onto the rug near her, his back still turned. "There are bandages in the box by the stove, and whiskey for the cut. Do it yourself." He heard her fumbling, the sound of wet cloth peeling from skin. He heard a sharp, indrawn breath of pain as she touched her own back. He did not turn. He busied himself at the stove, making coffee. The silence stretched. He heard her start to sweep the floor. The sound was weak, shuffling. He turned. She was on her feet, but just barely. She had the nightgown on. It swallowed her whole. She was holding his broom, trying to sweep the dirt floor. Her face was pale, slick with sweat. "I can work," she repeated, her voice a thread. "I can cook. I can mend." "Sit down, girl," Eli said, annoyed. "You are no good to me, sick." She shook her head, stubborn. "I have to pay my way." She took 2 more shuffling steps toward the stove. Maybe to start cooking. Maybe just to get warm. Her eyes rolled back in her head. She swayed. "I am fine," she whispered. She collapsed. Her hand hit the side of the hot stove on the way down. She screamed, a thin, sharp sound. Eli cursed. He crossed the room in 2 strides. She was crumpled on the floor, clutching her hand, unconscious again. The fever had taken her. He stood over her for a long moment. He could put her back outside. The storm would take her. It would be an answer. He thought of Sarah, shaking with fever in his cot. He thought of Thomas, his small body burning up. He swore again, low and bitter. He lifted her. This time, he carried her to his cot and laid her down. He looked at her hand. It was red, blistering already. He got a tin of salve and spread it over the burn, his touch rough but efficient. Then he turned to her back. He had to roll her onto her stomach. The flannel of the nightgown was already sticking to the whip wound. He gritted his teeth and peeled it away. He had been right. It was a lash, deep, ugly, and inflamed. It was infected. "Fool girl," he muttered. He took the whiskey bottle and a clean rag. He poured the liquor onto the cloth and pressed it to the cut. Clara's body arched off the cot with a silent, agonizing scream. She did not wake, but her hands clenched into fists. Eli held her down with one hand and cleaned the wound with the other. He worked with a set jaw. He did not feel pity. He felt anger. Anger that she was here, forcing him to remember. He bandaged the wound tightly. He covered her with his thickest blanket. He pulled his chair to the side of the cot, set his rifle across his lap, and sat down to wait. He sat there for 2 days. The storm did not stop. It buried the cabin. Snow piled up past the windows, plunging the room into a gray, permanent twilight. The wind moaned, a constant, low grief. Clara burned. She thrashed and whispered. Names he did not know. "No," she said, over and over. "Please, Jedediah, no!" She cried out for her father. She begged someone to stop. Eli did not comfort her. He simply kept her from falling off the cot. He forced water between her lips when she was lucid enough to swallow. He changed the bandage. He checked her burned hand. He kept the fire roaring. He did not sleep. He watched her, his face a mask of stone. He saw the bruises on her neck, the raw fear in her face even when she was unconscious. He had seen fear like that before. He had seen it in the eyes of men before a battle. He still assumed she was trouble, a saloon girl who had gotten crosswise with a violent customer. The name, Jedediah, meant nothing to him. On the 3rd morning, the wind died. The silence was sudden and total. Eli was ladling thin broth into a bowl when her eyes opened. This time, there was no terror, just a vast, empty weakness. She stared at the log ceiling. "You are still here," he said. It was not a question. She turned her head. She saw the chair, the empty bowl on the floor, the rifle leaning against it. She understood. He had sat there the whole time. "The fever broke," he said. He held out the bowl of broth. "Eat." She tried to sit up, but her arms shook. He slid a hand behind her back, careful of the wound, and lifted her just enough. He did not help her with the spoon. She drank the broth, her hands shaking so badly she spilled most of it. When she was done, she lay back down. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli just grunted. He took the bowl and went back to the stove. Days blurred into a week, then 2. The snow did not melt. It settled, heavy and deep, locking the valley in. Eli would go out in the mornings, his figure a dark shape against the blinding white, to check his traps and feed the stock. He would be gone for hours. Clara healed. The burn on her hand scabbed over. The wound on her back began to itch. She got her strength back, and with it, a deep, restless shame. She was indebted to this silent, hard man. When he was gone, she worked. She scrubbed the floor. She washed his few dishes. She found his mending basket and patched his shirts, her stitches tiny and neat. She found a sack of flour and a tin of baking soda, and she baked biscuits. They were hard as rocks. She threw them out before he got back. He never said anything. He would come in, stamp the snow from his boots, and see the clean floor or the mended shirt. He would not acknowledge it. He would just sit, eat the meal she had prepared, usually a flavorless stew of rabbit meat and dried beans, and then he would clean his rifle or carve. He carved small animals, birds, a deer, a small horse. He worked with an intense, quiet focus. The silence in the cabin grew heavier. It was not an empty silence. It was a silence full of things that could not be said. She would watch him from her pallet by the fire. He had given her his cot while she was sick, but the moment she could stand, he had pointed to a stack of blankets. "You sleep there." He took his cot back. She would watch his hands, strong and calloused, as they moved the knife over the wood. She would watch his face in the firelight. He looked like a man who had been carved from wood himself, all hard angles and splinters. He watched her, too. He watched her when she thought he was not looking. He saw her flinch when he dropped a log by the fire. He saw her eyes go distant and empty when she stared into the flames. He saw the way she rubbed the finger where the wedding ring had been. He had seen her examining it one day, that gaudily ring. Then, the next day, it was gone. He figured she had hidden it. It confirmed his suspicion. She was hiding something. She was a thief. "When will the snow clear?" she asked one night. Her voice sounded strange, loud in the quiet room. He did not look up from his carving. "The pass will not be clear until April, maybe May." She flinched. "April? It was only December." "I cannot stay here that long," she said, her voice small. He finally looked up. His gray eyes were flat. "You can go any time you like. The snow is 10 feet deep. The wolves are hungry." She said nothing else. She was trapped. He was trapped with her. The landscape outside was a mirror. It was bleak, white, and endless. There was no color, no life, just the gray sky, the white snow, and the dark, skeletal trees. It was a perfect match for the cold, buried grief inside the two people trapped within the cabin. One night, the cold was sharper than usual. The fire seemed to give no heat. Eli was in his usual chair, half dozing, the rifle on his lap. Clara was on her pallet, twisted in the blankets, her back to the room. The nightmare came for her again. It was not Jedediah Stone this time. It was her father, his face smooth and smiling, handing her over. It was the priest, turning his back. It was a carriage, the whip, the sound of men shouting. She whimpered, a low, desperate sound. "No, please, do not let me go." Her body thrashed, her hands fighting off blankets, fighting off ghosts. Eli woke instantly. The sound annoyed him. It pulled him from the shallow peace he had. "Girl," he said, his voice a low growl. "Wake up. You are dreaming." She did not hear him. She was lost. She cried out, a muffled, terrified sound. He got up from his chair, his patience gone. He crossed to her pallet and knelt. He put a hand on her shoulder to shake her awake. "I said, wake up." Clara came out of the dream like she was breaking through ice. She screamed, but no sound came out. Her eyes were wide and blind. All she saw was a shadow, a man, a hand reaching for her. She reacted. She did not cower. She did not plead. She attacked. She lunged, grabbing his wrist with both of her hands. Her grip was not the grip of a weak, fevered woman. It was the grip of pure, cornered animal terror. Her nails dug into his skin. Eli froze. He could have thrown her off. He could have broken her grip in a second. But he did not. He just stared down at her. His wrist caught tight. He saw her. He saw the panic in her eyes. He saw she was not looking at him, but through him. She was seeing someone else, someone who had hurt her. He did not move. He did not speak. He just let her hold him, his own body rigid. The cabin was silent, save for her gasping breaths and the crackle of the fire. Slowly, the terror in her eyes began to fade. The world came back into focus. She saw the rough log walls. She saw the fire. She saw the man kneeling over her. Eli Morgan. She was clutching his wrist like a lifeline. She let go as if his skin had turned to hot iron. She scrambled backward, pushing herself against the cold stone of the hearth, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice shaking violently. I thought I was dreaming." Eli looked at his wrist. 4 small, bloody crescent moons were rising where her nails had been. He stood up. He did not say, "It is all right." He did not say anything. He wordlessly went back to his chair. He sat down. He picked up the rifle and settled it back onto his lap. Clara watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was terrified. She had attacked him. He would surely throw her out now. But he just sat there, staring into the fire. Neither of them spoke of it. Not that night, not the next day. But something in the cabin had changed. The silence was still heavy, but it was different. It was brittle. He knew her fear was real, and she knew, in the deepest, most animal part of her mind, that when she had been lost in her terror, this silent, cold man had not pulled away. He had not hurt her. He had simply let her be. The morning after the nightmare, the silence in the cabin was different. It was no longer heavy. It was sharp. Clara woke with a start, her hand flying to her mouth, the memory of her own nails digging into Eli's wrist burning in her mind. He was already up, stoking the fire. He moved as if nothing had happened. He did not look at her. He did not speak. He pulled on his heavy coat, grabbed his rifle, and opened the door. A blast of frigid, blinding white light filled the room. "Do not let the fire go out," he said, his voice flat. Then he stepped outside and pulled the door shut, leaving her alone in the gray quiet. Clara's physical wounds were healing. The burn on her hand was a tight, shiny scar. The whip wound on her back had closed, leaving a ridge of angry, puckered skin that pulled every time she twisted. But the healing only made her more restless. She was a debt that had not been paid. She spent that day working until her body ached. She scrubbed the planks of his small table. She reorganized his meager tins of food. She found a bucket of lye soap and attacked the greasy film on the cast-iron stove until it shone. She was trying to scrub away the shame of her own terror. When Eli returned, snow clinging to his beard, he glanced at the clean stove and the organized shelves. He said nothing. He just hung his rifle on the pegs by the door and sat down to clean his traps. This became their pattern. The winter locked them in, but the routine saved them from madness. Eli's days were a map of survival. Clara began to learn that map by heart. She would watch him through the cabin's single, warped glass window. He was a creature of the cold. He moved with a heavy, purposeful grace. She watched him chop wood. He did not attack the logs. He split them, one by one, with a clean, powerful, and economical stroke. The axe fell. The wood split. He tossed the pieces over and over. There was no anger in it, just grim, necessary work. She watched him check the fences by the barn, his hands bare to the cold, expertly twisting the wire. But it was how he was with the animals that made her stop. He had 2 horses, a big roan gelding and a bay mare. They were thin from the long winter but strong. Eli treated them with a peculiar, quiet reverence. Clara cracked the cabin door one afternoon, needing to fetch water from the melted snow barrel. The wind was low. She heard his voice. It was so different from the rough growl he used in the cabin that she froze. "Easy, girl," he was murmuring to the mare. "I know it is cold. I know, but spring is coming. He was rubbing the horse's neck, his gloved hand moving in slow circles. "Just hold on. We will hold on." He spoke to his horses more in one afternoon than he had spoken to Clara in a month. She saw his loneliness then. It was not just silence. It was an active, breathing thing. It was a choice. He had built a wall around himself, and the only things he let inside were the animals, things that could not talk back, could not promise, and could not die from a fever. She ducked back inside, her heart pounding. She felt like she had spied on him, like she had seen something private and raw. A few days later, he was gone longer than usual, checking a trap line that ran up the ridge. The cabin felt too small. Clara was cleaning, always cleaning. She was wiping down the small, crude bureau he had built in the corner. It had 3 drawers. The top 2 were filled with extra ammunition, whetstones, and dried hides. The bottom drawer was locked. It was not a proper lock, just a small, rusty padlock. But as she wiped the dust from the wood, her rag caught on the handle. She pulled. The wood of the drawer was swollen from the damp, and the hasp was loose. With a low, scraping groan, the drawer pulled open just an inch. She knew she should not. It was his, it was private. But the urge to understand the man who was keeping her alive was overwhelming. Her fingers, thin and shaking, slid into the gap. She pulled it open. It was not full. There were only 3 things inside. The first was a woman's shawl, made of fine wool, dyed a deep, vibrant blue. It smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The second was a small, leather-bound Bible. The third was a piece of paper, folded and worn. She opened it. It was not a letter. It was a child's drawing. It was done in charcoal, clumsy and simple. It showed a tall stick man with a beard, a smaller stick woman with wild hair, and a tiny, tiny stick boy between them. Underneath, in messy letters, it said, "Papa, Mama, Tom." Clara's breath caught in her throat. This was not a cabin. It was a grave. This was the life he had lost. This was Sarah. This was Thomas. She tried to shut the drawer, but it stuck, the swollen wood grinding. The cabin door opened. Eli was home. He stood dripping snow onto the floor, his rifle in his hand. He looked at her. He looked at the open drawer. His face did not change. He did not frown. He did not move. But the air in the room dropped 10 degrees. The silence that filled the space was violent. Clara felt her face burn with shame. I was cleaning. It stuck. I did not mean." He walked past her. He did not shove her. He did not touch her, but she recoiled as if he put his hand on the drawer and, with one smooth, powerful shove, slammed it shut. The sound was as final as a gunshot. He turned. He looked down at her. His eyes were not angry. They were dead. "Do not," he said. That was all. He walked to the fire, turned his back to her, and began to unload his rifle. Clara stood by the bureau, her hands twisted in her apron, feeling like a thief who had been caught stealing a man's memories. The next week, the weather broke just enough for a partial thaw. The sun was a weak, watery thing, but it was there. With the thaw came new problems. The wind from the last storm had been fierce, and a section of the barn roof, already rotting, had been peeled back. Eli came in from feeding the stock, his face grim. "Roof is open. Snow is getting in the hay." He gathered a hammer, a burlap sack full of nails, and some spare shingles. Clara watched him. She could not stand the silence. She could not stand the debt. She put on the thin, torn coat she had arrived in and followed him out. He heard her footsteps crunching in the snow and turned. "Go back inside." "I can help," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. He looked at her. He looked at her soft, healing hands. "You cannot? I am not useless," she said, and there was a sudden, sharp edge to her voice that made him pause. She hated that word. Useli, It was what her father had called her, useless, good for nothing but a dowry. "I will not sit by the fire while you work. I can hold the nails. I can hand you the shingles." He stared at her for a long moment. He saw the set of her jaw. It was not a request. It was a statement. He grunted, a sound of reluctant acceptance, and turned back to the barn. "Stay out of the way." The ladder was slick with ice. He climbed up. She gathered the shingles and followed, her skirts heavy, her body clumsy in the cold. The roof was pitched at a steep angle, covered in patches of snow. The wind was sharp up here. It cut right through her coat. For 3 hours, they worked. It was a strange, silent dance. He would tear away a rotten piece of wood. She would be there with a fresh shingle. He would hold it in place. She would hand him the nails, one by one. She was good at it. She anticipated his movements. She was quick. She did not complain about the cold. He was ripping out a particularly stubborn, frozen board. He pulled back hard. The board gave way suddenly. He stumbled backward. Clara was right behind him, holding the sack of nails. He collided with her. His arm, hard as oak, slammed against her chest. Her shoulder hit his. She lost her balance on the slick wood. She cried out, a small gasp of fear, and her hands flew out. Grabbing his coat to steady herself, he grabbed her arm at the same time, his grip like a steel trap, keeping her from sliding. They froze. They were tangled together. Her face was pressed against the rough wool of his coat. She could smell the pine and the cold and the man himself. His hand was clamped on her upper arm. She was clutching the front of his jacket. It was the first time they had touched since the nightmare. But that had been terror. This was awareness. She was aware of how big he was, how solid. He was aware of how small she was, how fragile she felt, even in her panic. It lasted only a second. Clara shoved herself backward, her face burning hot despite the freezing wind. "I am sorry." Eli let go of her arm as if it were hot. He turned away from her, his back rigid. "Watch your footing." He went back to hammering, but the rhythm was broken. His movements were stiff, angry. She stood apart from him, her heart hammering, holding the sack of nails in her trembling hands. They finished the roof in silence. That night, Eli noticed her hands. She was trying to knead dough for their bread. Her back was to him, but he could see her wince. He saw her stop and flex her fingers, trying to work the pain out. When she sat down by the fire to wait for the bread to bake, she examined them. Eli watched her from the shadows of his chair. Her hands were a mess. The burn scar was angry and red, but it was the blisters that he saw. From the scrubbing, from the mending, from the rough shingles and the cold nails. Her palms were raw. Several of the blisters had broken, and she was bleeding. He had assumed she was a lady, or a whore, soft, useless. He looked at her hands, bloody from work. He looked at her thin, stubborn profile. She had not complained, not once, not about the cold, not about the roof, not about her hands. A strange, unfamiliar feeling moved in his chest. It was a tightness, a softening. He got up. Clara flinched, expecting him to be angry about the bread, or the floor, or something. He went to his cot and rummaged in the small box beneath it. He pulled out a spool of heavy sinew thread and a large, curved harness needle. He walked over to where she sat. He pointed at her coat, which was lying on the floor next to her. The tear in the shoulder, from her escape, was still there. She had tried to patch it, but her stitches were small and weak. "Give it here," he said. Confused, she handed him the coat. He sat back down in his chair. He threaded the thick sinew into the needle, his big calloused fingers moving with surprising deftness, and he began to sew. He did not sew like a woman. His stitches were huge, ugly, and crossed over each other. He plunged the needle through the thick cloth with force, pulling the sinew tight with a grunt. He was mending her coat the same way he had mended the barn roof. He was building a defense. Clara watched him. His head was bent. The firelight caught the gray in his beard. His brow was furrowed in concentration. It was the most awkward, clumsy, and tender thing she had ever seen. He finished. He bit the thread, tied it off, and tossed the coat back to her. She picked it up. The patch was brutal, but it was strong. The wind would not get through that. She looked at him, and her throat felt thick. She could not remember the last time someone had done something for her without asking for payment. "Thank you," she whispered. She did not know his first name. She had only ever heard the name on the child's drawing. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan." He just nodded, his gaze already back on the fire. But he had heard her, and she had seen him. Just when they had settled back into their silent routine, the sky turned a dark, bruised yellow. The wind stopped. The silence outside became absolute. "Another one," Eli said, standing at the door. "A bad one." It hit them an hour later. It was not like the first storm, which had been full of wind and fury. This was just snow, thick, heavy, endless snow. It fell silently, piling up against the door, covering the window. For 2 days, the world outside ceased to exist. They were trapped in a gray, 20-foot box, lit only by the fireplace and a single lantern. They cooked, they ate, they cleaned. They ran out of things to do. The silence, which had been a barrier, now became a prison. It pressed in on them. Eli was carving, but his hands were restless. Clara was mending socks, but she had mended them all. On the second afternoon, Clara could not bear it anymore. "Mr. Morgan?" He looked up. She pointed to a small wooden box on his shelf. "I saw there are playing cards in that box." He looked at the box. He had not touched those cards since Sarah died. "Do you know how to play?" Clara asked, her voice small, desperate for any distraction. He was quiet for a long time. "I know war. It was a child's game. It was the only game he and Thomas had ever played." He got the box. The cards were old. The faces faded. They were soft as cloth. He sat at the table. She sat across from him. He dealt the deck in 2 piles, face down. "Go," he said. They turned their cards, a 3, a 7. He took the cards. They played slap, slap, slap. The only sound in the room was the flick of the cards on the wood. It was simple. It required no thought. They played for an hour. He won. She won. He dealt again. Clara was starting to feel lightheaded from the lack of air, from the tension. She was trying to make it normal. "My father," she said, just to make a sound. "He used to play cards, but he was not very good. He lost a lot." She stopped, realizing where that thought was going. She flipped a card, a jack. Eli flipped a queen. He took the cards. She looked at his pile, then at her own dwindling one. She tried to smile. "You are a better player than he was." She flipped a king. He flipped a 4. She took the pile. "Perhaps," she said, trying to be playful. "You are too good. Mr. Morgan, perhaps you are cheating." She looked at him. A sound came out of him. It was a short, rough bark. It was like a cough and a laugh. All at once, pulled from a rusty pipe. His mouth had twitched. It might have been a smile. It was over as soon as it began. His face settled back into its stony mask. But Clara stared. She had heard it. She had made this man, this statue, laugh. The shock of it, the intimacy of it, was too much. She flushed red and looked down at her cards, immediately startled and ashamed, as if she had broken a sacred rule. Eli cleared his throat. The sound was loud in the small room. He nodded at her deck. "Your play." The game continued. But the air in the room had changed, cracked open just a little, letting in a sliver of light. That night, after the storm had finally passed, The routine returned, but Eli watched her more. He sat in his chair, his rifle on his lap, while she slept on her pallet by the fire. He was supposed to be watching for intruders, or just dozing, but he was watching her. He saw how young she was. The firelight softened the worn lines around her eyes. She was just a girl. Her hair was matted, her face smudged with soot. She looked like a refugee, worn down to nothing but bone and will. He saw the way her hand clutched the blanket, the same way she had clutched his wrist. He thought of the child's drawing in his drawer. He thought of his wife, her body growing thinner and thinner on that cot. He felt a coldness in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the cold of a hollow place. The nights grew colder. The storm had brought a deep, biting frost that the fire could not beat back. The draft from under the door was a living, breathing snake of ice. Clara was on her pallet. She had every blanket he owned, but she was still shaking. He could hear her teeth chattering. He could hear the small, dry cough that was starting in her chest. It was the same cough. He was sitting in his chair, staring at the fire, pretending not to listen. "Mr. Morgan." Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the wind. He grunted, not looking at her. She sat up. She was wrapped in a quilt, looking like a small, shivering ghost. She was looking at him. I am so cold." He said nothing. He threw another log on the fire. It did not help. She took a shaky breath. He could see her trembling, see the fear in her eyes. She was afraid to ask. "Could I?" she started, then stopped. She licked her chapped lips. "Could I sleep in the bed?" Eli went perfectly still. The cot, his cot, the one he had not shared with anyone since Sarah, the place he had slept alone for 4 years, the last piece of him that was his. Clara saw his stillness and mistook it for anger. She rushed to speak, the words tumbling out. "Just this once, please, without anything expected. I will not bother you. I will stay on the edge. It is just the floor is so cold. I cannot get warm." He stared at her. He saw her plea. It was not the plea of a woman. It was the plea of a freezing animal. It was the same plea he had seen in the eyes of dying men on the battlefield. A plea for warmth, a plea for a moment of peace. His jaw tightened. He wanted to say no. He wanted to tell her to build up the fire and leave him be. He looked at her, shivering. He heard the cough again. He thought of Sarah, begging him to hold her, her body burning with fever. He had held her, and she had died anyway. He stood up. Clara flinched, thinking he was going to yell at her, maybe drag her to the door. He walked to the cot. He stood over it for a long second, his back to her. Then, in one rough, silent motion, he grabbed the edge of his quilt and lifted it, pulling it back. It was an answer. Clara scrambled to her feet, dragging her own thin blanket. She moved to the cot. She was terrified of him, but she was more afraid of the cold. She slid into the bed, pressing herself tight against the log wall, making herself as small as a child. The mattress was thin, stuffed with corn husks, but it was off the floor. Eli stood there. He could feel her warmth, her trembling, in his bed. He blew out the lantern. The room was lit only by the red glow of the fire. He did not take off his boots. He laid down on the cot, but on top of the covers, he laid his rifle on the floor, right beside him. Then he turned his back to her. It was a solid wall of denial, a promise. You are on that side, I am on this side. Clara lay in the dark, staring at the broad, unmoving shape of his back. She was in his bed. He was next to her, and she had never felt safer in her entire life. She waited for the fear to come. It did not. She felt the warmth from the mattress, the ambient heat coming from his body, feet away. She pulled her blanket up to her chin. Her shivering began to slow. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since she had run from Jedediah Stone, she did not dream. She slept. Clara woke up before him. She knew, even with her eyes closed, that the world had changed. The wind was gone. The heavy, oppressive weight of the storm had lifted. She opened her eyes. Eli was not in his chair. He was in the cot. Her heart hammered. She had stayed on the very edge of the mattress, her back pressed to the cold log wall, her body rigid. He had stayed on his side, turned away from her. A mountain of silence. She had not slept. Not really. She had just rested in the warmth. She slid from the bed. He did not stir, though she knew he was not truly asleep. He was a man who never slept. She went back to her own pallet on the floor. It was a cold, hard choice. She sat, pulling the thin quilt around her, and waited for the day to begin. The line between them had been drawn, crossed, and then drawn again, thicker this time. An hour later, he rose. He did not look at her. He stoked the fire, put on his coat, and went outside. Clara followed, standing in the open doorway. The storm had cleared. The sun was a bright, cruel thing, reflecting off a world of unbroken, blinding white. The sky was a pale, sharp blue. It was beautiful, and it was a prison. Eli was sharpening his axe, the sound of the whetstone on the steel a rhythmic, scraping sound. The new, shared warmth of the cot, however brief, had made the silence of the day unbearable. She had to break it. She had to know something, anything, about the man who had cleaned her wound and sewn her coat and led her into his bed. Mr. Morgan. The scraping stopped. He did not look up. Did you grow up here?" she asked, her voice small. "In these mountains?" He ran the stone along the blade. Slowly, he tested the edge with his thumb. "People do not come here to talk," he said. His voice was flat, not mean, just empty. "They come here to be quiet." It was a dismissal. It was a door shutting. Clara felt the sting of it. She pulled her thin shawl tighter. She was just another mouth to feed, another problem that had washed up in his barn. He was right. She was a guest. She had no right to his past. The rejection, however, broke something in her. If he would not share, she would. She had to. She could not be the thieving whore he thought she was for one more day. "I did not come here to be quiet," she said. This time, he stopped. He looked at her, his gray eyes unreadable in the bright light. "I came here to run," she whispered, looking down at her frozen hands. "The day I found your barn, that was my wedding day." Eli stood perfectly still. He was a statue carved from shadow, holding an axe. "My father," she said, the words tasting like ash. "He owed a man, Mr. Stone. He owed him a great deal of money. My family has no money. We have no land left. I had no dowry." She looked up, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "So I was the payment." She watched his face. "Nothing, no pity, no surprise, just watching." "He was not a kind man," she continued, her voice gaining a thin, reedy strength. "He was pleased with his purchase. When we were in the carriage, after the preacher was gone, he said he would teach me my duties. I told him no. I told him the marriage was a sin, that I would not have him." She involuntarily touched her own back, a gesture she had made 100 times, feeling the phantom line of fire. "He did not like that. He used a buggy whip, just once." She took a ragged breath. "When he stopped the carriage to adjust the harness, I just ran into the trees. I did not know the storm was coming. I just knew I could not let him touch me. I would rather the wolves or the cold." She finished. The silence that followed was absolute. There was no wind, just the sound of a single drop of water falling from an icicle on the cabin eaves. Eli did not speak. He turned from her. He walked to the largest, thickest log on his woodpile. He set his feet. He raised the axe high over his head, his back muscles bunching under his coat. He brought it down. Thwack! The sound was like a gunshot, echoing off the snow. The log split clean in two. He set up another thwack and another thwack. Clara flinched with every single strike. It was a terrifying, controlled violence. He was not just chopping wood. He was answering her. He was taking the image of Jedediah Stone, of her father, of the buggy whip, and he was destroying it, log by log. He did not stop until the log was nothing but splinters. He was breathing hard, a cloud of steam in front of his face. He lowered the axe. He turned to her. His face was dark, his eyes burning. "Kindness," he said, his voice a low growl, "is not a debt." Clara stared, confused. "You do not owe me," he said, biting off each word. "Not for shelter, not for food. You stop trying to pay. You are not a debt here." He picked up the split wood, his arms full, and stalked past her into the cabin. The conversation was over, but as Clara stood there in the snow, the tears freezing on her cheeks, she felt a stone of shame she had been carrying for months simply roll away. He did not think she was a whore. He did not think she was a thief. He saw her. The wall between them was still there, but a door had been cut into it. The long winter began to die. It died slowly, stubbornly, fighting for every inch. The snow melted, not into water, but into a thick, greedy mud that sucked at a man's boots. The world turned from white and gray to a uniform, ugly brown. But with the mud came a rhythm. They fell into it. It was the rhythm of survival. It was almost like a marriage, but without the comfort. He would rise in the dark, hunt for rabbit or deer in the melting woods. He would come back and hand her the game. She would skin it, stew it, stretch the hide. He would mend the fences in the barn. She would mend his clothes, her neat stitches replacing his own clumsy sinew work. They still did not talk, but the silence was different. It was not empty. It was full. It was the silence of two people working at the same task, a silence that did not need to be filled. One afternoon, the sun was warm enough that she could take the laundry outside. She was washing his heavy flannel shirts in a bucket of snowmelt over a small fire. Her hands were red, raw, and chapped, but she was used to the sting. She was alone. He was checking traps up the ridge. She was scrubbing the collar of a shirt, and a tune came to her. It was an old one, something her mother used to hum. She did not even realize she was doing it. A low, soft hum. Then words. "I am a poor, wayfaring stranger," she sang, her voice quiet, a little rusty from disuse. "A traveling through this world of woe." She had a clear, sweet voice. It was not strong, but it was true. It was the only beautiful thing in that muddy, bleak valley. Eli was walking back from the woods, a string of rabbits over his shoulder. He broke through the tree line and heard it. He froze. His hand went to his side. He stood behind a tall spruce, completely hidden, and he listened. The sound of her voice, it was like a knife in his chest. It was the sound of life. It was the sound of Sarah, humming by the stove. It was the sound of everything he had buried under the pine trees. It was a sound he had not heard in 4 years, and it hurt. It was a terrible, beautiful pain. He stood there, frozen, until the song was done. She started a second one. He could not move. He let the sound wash over him, breaking down parts of him he thought were long dead. She stopped abruptly, in the middle of a line. He knew she had sensed something. He stepped out from behind the tree, making his boots crunch loudly in the slush. Clara spun around, her hands flying to her chest, her face burning red. "Mr. Morgan, I did not hear you." He walked past her, his face a mask of stone. "Fire is getting low," he said, and dumped the rabbits by the cabin door. He went inside. But she knew. He had heard her, and he knew that in her own quiet way, she was no longer just surviving. She was starting to live. The spring melt did not come gently. It came like a war. The snow on the high peaks, Feet and feet of it began to give way. The creek that ran through the valley, a polite little stream all winter, turned into a roaring, brown monster. Eli woke one night to a new sound. Not wind, water. He threw open the cabin door. The moon was full, and it lit a scene of chaos. The creek had jumped its banks. A churning, icy river was cutting a new path. It was heading directly for the barn. "Clara!" he roared. He did not call her girl. He called her name. "Get up! Grab the shovels!" She was awake in an instant. The panic in his voice was real. They ran outside. The ground was already a swamp. The icy water was swirling around their ankles. The roar was deafening. "The foundation!" Eli yelled over the sound. "If it washes out the foundation, we lose the barn! We lose the animals!" They had to turn it. They grabbed the shovels and a pickaxe and ran to the head of the new channel. The water was fast, full of ice and debris. "We have to dig a trench," he shouted, pointing. "Back toward the old bed. Give it somewhere to go." They dug. It was not work. It was a fight. The ground was a thick, frozen mud, a soup of dirt and ice. For every shovelful they threw, the water seemed to bring two more in. Clara worked like a demon. She was not a strong woman, but she was driven. She dug, her thin arms shaking. She used the shovel as a lever, prying rocks loose. She was soaked to the bone in seconds. Mud and icy water plastered to her. Eli worked beside her. He was a machine, his pickaxe rising and falling, breaking the frozen earth, roaring at the water, at the mud, at God. They worked for an hour, or maybe two. Time ceased to exist. There was only the roar of the water and the burn in their shoulders. They were making progress. The channel was deepening. The water was starting to turn. "Just a little more," Eli yelled. Clara moved to a new spot, trying to widen the channel. She plunged her shovel into the bank. The ground beneath her, completely saturated, gave way. It was not a slow slide. It was a collapse. She screamed as the bank dissolved. She fell, tumbling into the main current of the flood. The water was a living thing. It was colder than the air, a cold that stopped her heart. It seized her, pulling her down, tumbling her over rocks. She swallowed a mouthful of mud and ice. "Eli!" she choked. He was there before she went under. He threw himself into the torrent, not even hesitating. He roared her name. He lunged, his long arms grabbing a handful of her hair, her shirt, anything. He got a solid grip under her arms and hauled her up. She was a dead weight, coughing, sputtering. He dragged her out of the main current and onto the muddy bank. She was on her hands and knees, vomiting muddy water, shaking so violently her teeth seemed to chatter out of her head. He looked at her, then he looked at the channel. The water was turning. The barn was safe. The crisis was over. A new one had begun. She was going to die of cold if he did not get her inside. He did not ask. He did not speak. He scooped her up in his arms. She was so light. She was all wet wool and trembling bone. He carried her, running, stumbling through the mud, back to the cabin. He kicked the door open and set her down on the bearskin rug in front of the hearth. Get out of those clothes," he ordered. His voice was rough, full of a new, raw panic. He had seen this before. He knew what the cold could do. He turned, grabbing every blanket he owned. He stoked the fire, throwing log after log, until it roared, spitting sparks. He turned back. Clara was on her knees. She was trying to unbutton her shirt, but her fingers were blue. They were numb. They would not obey. She was crying, deep, shuddering, hopeless sobs. "I cannot," she stuttered. Her shirt, a simple cotton thing, was plastered to her. It was thin. In the firelight, he could see everything. The shape of her, the pale skin. He took a step toward her, his face a mask of grim necessity. "Here." He reached for the buttons. But she looked up. Her eyes were not just cold, They were not just afraid. They were wide and dark and full of something he had not seen before. It was not just fear, it was longing. It was a desperate, defiant plea. He stopped, his hand hovering in the air. "Eli," she whispered. It was the first time she had used his given name. It hit him like a physical blow. He stood frozen. "Please," she said. Her voice was shaking, but not from the cold. Not anymore. Just this once. He knew what she was asking, and he knew what she was not asking. She was not offering her body for payment. She had already told him she would rather die. She was not a whore. She was a woman who had been bought, a woman who had been whipped, a woman who had been taken from. And now she was asking to choose. She was asking to feel human again, to feel warmth, to feel a touch that was not violent, a touch that was not a transaction. Eli's whole body was rigid. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to turn away, to put her in the blankets and walk out into the storm. This was how it started. This was the crack. This was the warmth that came before the fever. This was how he lost. He looked at her, kneeling in the firelight. He saw the scar on her hand. He saw the shadow of the whip mark through the wet cloth. He saw her defiance. He was terrified. Not of her. He was terrified of the thaw, the one inside him. He looked at her for a long, agonizing second. He saw Sarah. He saw Thomas. He saw the empty cabin. Then he gave one single, stiff nod. A breath she had been holding for her entire life shuddered out of her. Her hands were still shaking, but they did not go to her own buttons. She reached out, her fingers pale and numb, and touched the front of his wet shirt. She fumbled with the button. He stood like a statue, letting her. She was undressing him. Her cold fingers brushed his skin. He did not flinch. She pulled the wet cloth from his shoulders. He let it fall. Then, her hands went to her own shirt. She unbuttoned it, her eyes never leaving his. She pushed it from her shoulders. The firelight lit the angry, raised scar on her back. He saw it. He really saw it. He saw the price of her running. He did not move. He did not touch her. She rose, unsteady, and went to the cot. She pulled back the blankets. She looked at him. It was an invitation. He moved. He sat on the cot. He pulled off his wet boots. He lay down. She lay down beside him, her back to him. He pulled the heavy quilts over both of them. They lay in silence. They were two bodies, still cold, still wet under a pile of blankets. They did not touch. Then, Clara began to shake again. It was not from the cold. A small, strangled sound came from her throat. It was a sob. She turned, slowly, and pressed her face into the rough wool of his undershirt, into the warmth of his chest. And she cried. It was not the sound of a woman weeping. It was the sound of an animal that had been trapped for years. It was a silent, agonizing release. All the fear, all the shame, all the running, it poured out of her. Eli lay on his back, rigid as a plank of wood. His arms were at his sides. He was staring at the log ceiling. He could feel her tears soaking his shirt. He could feel her small body shuddering against his. He wanted to move. He wanted to get up. He wanted to run back out into the flood. He thought of the drawing in his drawer. Papa, Mama, Tom. He was a dead man. He had been for years. But the woman in his arms was alive, and she was crying. Slowly, as if his arm weighed 1,000 pounds, as if he was fighting a war against himself. He lifted his right hand. He hesitated. Then he laid it on her hair. He threaded his fingers through the damp, silky strands. He did not pull her closer. He did not speak. He just held her. He held her as she cried, his jaw tight, his own eyes squeezed shut, feeling the terrible, frightening, undeniable warmth of another human being in his arms. He was not just holding her. He was holding himself together as his frozen world finally began to break. The morning after the flood. Clara woke in the cot. She was alone, but the mattress beside her was still warm. Eli was already at the fire, his back to her, pushing logs into the flames. He did not speak. She did not speak. He had held her until her crying stopped, and then, for a long time after, they had fallen asleep like that. Two shipwrecked survivors clinging to the same piece of driftwood. It was a shared, silent, and terrifying thing. Now, in the gray light of morning, the shame of it felt heavy. She had been weak. She had cried. She had invited. She slid from the cot, pulling the quilt around her, and went to her own pallet. The floor was cold. Eli turned. He had 2 cups of coffee. He pushed one toward her on the table. He still did not meet her eyes, but he did not take the cup back. Outside, the world was a different place. The roar of the flood had faded to the gurgle of 1,000 small streams. The sound of dripping water was constant. The thaw was real. The prison was melting. A few days later, the muddy trail that led down the mountain was finally clear of snow, a treacherous line of brown slush. Eli came in from checking the horses. "The pass is open," he said. "I saw a wagon track. I am going to town." Clara's head snapped up. "Town." "I need supplies," he said, not looking at her. "Flour, salt, coffee, ammunition." She felt a cold knot of panic. He was leaving. He was leaving her alone. The man who had been her warden, her protector, her silent companion, was rejoining the world. And the world was where Jedediah Stone was. "When?" she whispered. "Now. It is a full day's ride. I will be back by dark tomorrow." He gathered his gear, a few pelts, his empty pouches. He was all business. The man who had held her was gone, replaced by the grim homesteader. He stopped at the door. "Bar this. Do not open it. For anyone." He unhooked his spare rifle from the wall. It was heavier than his. He pushed it into her hands. "Do you know how to use this?" "My father, he taught me," she said, her hands trembling as she took the cold, oiled steel. "Good," he said. His gray eyes finally met hers. They were dark, serious. "Do not hesitate. You hear anything, you shoot. Through the door if you have to." He nodded, once, and was gone. She heard the sound of his horse, the roan, sucking its hooves from the mud, and then nothing. She was alone. She stood in the middle of the room, holding the rifle. It was the first time she had been truly alone in the cabin. The silence was absolute. It was bigger, emptier than when he was there. She barred the door. She spent the first few hours in a state of high alert. Every drip of water was a footstep. Every creak of the warming logs was a man's voice. She sat in his chair, the rifle across her lap, just as he had done. But the day wore on, and no one came. The silence began to change. It was no longer threatening. It was hers. She got up, she cleaned, she scrubbed the floor. She mended the shirt he had worn during the flood, but she was restless. She was not a prisoner. She was the cabin's keeper. Her eyes fell on the cot. She had slept there. She had cried there. Beneath it, she had seen him shove his boots. She knelt. She was not a guest anymore. She was something else. She had to know. She looked under the bed. There was his spare ammunition box, a tin of grease, and pushed far back, almost hidden, a small, flat tin box. It was not locked. It was dark with rust. She pulled it out. Her heart was hammering. This was a violation. This was the one thing he had not shared. She sat on the floor and opened it. It was not full. It smelled of lavender and paper, a dry, dead smell. Inside was a small, worn Bible and a packet of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. She untied the ribbon. The letters were thin, the paper brittle, the ink was faded. The handwriting was a woman's, neat and round. "My dearest Eli," the first one began. "October 1864. The town is quiet, but the war feels so far away. Little Tommy said Papa today. He pointed at your chair. He misses you. I miss you. Please be safe. Come home. Clara's hand went to her mouth. She read the next one. November 1864. The winter came early. Tommy has a cough that will not leave him. I am giving him the honey and onion, as you said. But he is so small. The nights are very cold. Eli, I am afraid. Clara's own breath felt cold. She thought of the night she had coughed, the night she had been so cold. She read the next. The handwriting was messier. December 1864. Eli, please, you must come home. The war can spare one man. The doctor from town will not come. He says it is just the fever, but his breathing is so shallow. I am burning up. I am so tired. I cannot keep the fire going much longer. Eli, I am so scared. God forgive me. I am so scared. It was the last letter. Clara sat there, the thin paper shaking in her hands. There were no more. The letters just stopped. She put them down and picked up the Bible. She opened the cover. Inside, in Eli's own hand, rough and dark, was a record. Sarah Morgan, born 1840, died 1864. Fever. Thomas Morgan, born 1862, died 1864. Fever. I was too late. Those were the only words. I was too late. Clara bowed her head. She did not cry. This was a grief too deep for tears. This was his shame. This was his guilt. He had not just lost his family. He had left them. He had chosen the war, a thing of principle, over them. And they had died alone, in the cold, while he was away being a soldier. He had come back not to a home, but to a tomb. The man she knew had not been born in the war. He had been born in the moment he opened that door and found them. She understood. Her father had sold her. The priest had turned his back. She had been left to face her monster alone. Eli had left his family, and they had faced their monster alone. It was the same cage. It was the same shame. It was the guilt of survival. She sat on the floor, in his empty cabin, holding his dead wife's letters, and she felt a connection to him that was stronger than any touch. She carefully, reverently, retied the ribbon. She put the letters and the Bible back in the tin box. She slid it back under the cot, exactly as she had found it. She stood up. She was no longer a refugee. She was no longer a debtor. She barred the door. She picked up the rifle, and she waited for him to come home. He returned at dusk the next day. The roan was heavy laden. He looked exhausted, covered in mud, his face grim. He came to the door, expecting to find it barred. He raised his hand to knock. It swung open. Clara was standing there. She was not huddled by the fire. She was waiting. Eli stopped. He stared. The cabin was clean. The fire was roaring. And the smell, it was not the smell of stale stew or burnt coffee. It was the smell of baked bread. It was the smell of roasted meat. He walked inside, dropping the heavy sacks of flour and salt by the door. The table was set for two. In the center was a pot pie, its crust a golden brown. There was a fresh loaf of bread. She had used his new supplies, the ones he had just brought. He looked at her, wary, confused. This was a home. This was what he had lost. It was a memory so painful he could not breathe. He was afraid. This was how the trap was set. This was how you learned to hope, just before the world took it all away again. Clara saw the fear in his eyes, the suspicion. She did not move. She pointed to his plate. A small piece of folded paper sat on the tin plate. He walked to the table. He picked it up. He unfolded it. It was not a letter. It was two words, written in charcoal from the fire. I'm not running. He read it. He read it again. The tension that had held him upright for 2 straight days, the rigid set of his shoulders, just broke. He closed his eyes, his head bowing, and he let out a long, shuddering breath. She was not a ghost. She was not leaving. She had seen the inside of his life, and she was still there. He looked up at her. He did not smile, but the deadness in his eyes was gone. "The mud," he said, his voice rough. "It is—" "I saved you some," she said. They ate in silence. But it was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of two people who had nothing left to hide. That night, they sat by the fire. He was cleaning the rifle he had bought in town. She was mending a tear in his coat. He spoke first, his voice low. "The pass is open," he said, his eyes on his work. "Town is full. Wagons are moving west. I have money. From the furs. It is enough. You could get to Durango. You could get a stagecoach. You could go east. Find a new place." He was offering her an escape. Clara stopped sewing. She looked at him. "I told you, Eli, I am not running." "Why?" he growled, frustrated. "Why stay? There is nothing here for you. This is a dead place. I am a dead man." "It is not dead," she said softly. He put the rifle down. He stared into the fire. He had to make her see. He had to show her the rot she was tying herself to. "I found them," he said, his voice flat. Clara's heart ached. She stayed quiet. "When I came back from the war, I found them. Sarah and Thomas." He spoke to the fire, not to her. "I was gone. I thought I do not know. A soldier, important. I got letters. Then they stopped. I came home. A month later. Maybe more." His throat worked. The cabin, the door was open. The snow had drifted inside. They were in the cot, together. She was holding him. He paused, and the silence in the room was a scream. They had been gone a long time. The cold had kept them. I came back to an empty house. I was too late. I was too late to even bury them proper. I did that myself. Out back, I left them. Clara, I chose to go, and they died alone. In the cold. He finally looked at her. His face was a mask of self-hatred. "That is who I am. The man who ran away. The man who let his family freeze." Clara put her mending down. She did not cry for him. She did not pity him. She saw him. She moved from her stool. She knelt on the bearskin rug, in front of his chair. "I was sold," she said, her voice clear and strong. He looked at her, confused. "I was not a bride. I was a debt. When my father gave me to Mr. Stone, he smiled. He thanked him for taking the burden off his hands." Eli's hands clenched into fists. "I went to the church," she continued, her voice never wavering. "Before the service, I found the priest. I begged him. I told him my father was selling me. I told him Jedediah Stone was a cruel man. I told him it was a sin." "What did he do?" Eli whispered. "He turned away from me." Clara said, "He looked at the wall, at a painting of the crucifixion, and he said, 'A daughter's duty is to her father. You must be obedient.' He turned his back. They all turned their backs. They left me." She looked up, meeting his haunted gaze. Her own eyes were fierce. "You and I, Eli, we are the same. Your guilt, my shame. It is the same cage. They left us to die. You in this cabin, me in that carriage." He stared at her. He was not seeing a girl. He was not seeing a victim. He was seeing himself, reflected. He reached out. His hand was shaking. He did not touch her hair, not like he was soothing a child. He cupped her face. His calloused, rough thumb stroked her cheek. "Clara," he said. It was the first time her name, in his voice, sounded like a prayer. He pulled her closer. She leaned into him. He held her. It was not a rescue. It was not comfort. It was a slow, reverent, and final embrace, a recognition. Later, they went to the cot. This time it was not for warmth. It was not a plea. He turned to her in the darkness. She turned to him. It was a slow, hesitant discovery. It was not the fire of passion. It was not lust. It was something far more intimate. It was a connection of skin and scars. It was the touch of two people who had been in the deepest, coldest part of the wilderness and had, impossibly, found another survivor. It was a silent, mutual, and solemn promise. I am here. I see you. You are not alone. The next morning, the sun rose into a clear sky. It felt new. Clara was outside, hanging a blanket on a line. Eli was splitting the last of the winter-rotted wood. A real peace had settled over the valley. It was the first day that felt like a beginning. And then they heard it. It was not one horse. It was three, coming up the trail, fast. Eli lowered the axe. He looked at Clara. Her face went white. She knew. Go inside, he said. His voice was quiet. Eli, no. Bar the door. Clara, now. She ran to the cabin. The bar slid into place. Eli stood in the middle of the yard, the axe held loosely in one hand. He did not move. 3 riders came into the clearing. The 2 in the back were hired men, rifles in their scabbards. They looked hard, bored. The man in the front was different. He was large, dressed in a fine black coat and a vest with a thick gold watch chain. His face was ruddy, his beard neatly trimmed. He looked prosperous and mean. He looked at the small cabin with a sneer. He reined in his horse, a big fine bay. This your homestead, friend? He called. His voice was oily, full of false confidence. It is, Eli said. Then you are harboring stolen property. The man smiled. It did not touch his eyes. I am Jedediah Stone. I am looking for my wife. She ran off, you see, a silly, hysterical girl. I tracked her to this valley. There is no one here but me, Eli said. Stone chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. We saw her, just a moment ago, a woman in a gray dress. Do not lie to me, friend. It will only make this harder. He looked at Eli, at his rough clothes, at the axe. I am sure she is a convincing thing, but she is my wife, under law. I have the certificate right here. I said, she is not here. Stone's smile vanished. Look at you, a broken-down trapper in a mud hole. She probably promised you things. My wife, she has a way of doing that. Seduced you, did she? Promised to share this kingdom? He spat on the ground near Eli's boot. I do not care what you did with her. She is a whore, but she is my whore. Hand her over. He started to dismount. Stay on the horse, Eli said. The axe handle creaked in his grip. Stone froze. He looked at the axe. He looked at Eli's eyes. The cabin door opened. Clara stepped out. She was pale as death. She was trembling so hard she could barely stand. Clara, get back inside. Eli growled, not taking his eyes off Stone. Ah, there she is, Stone said, his smile returning. He was on solid ground now. My dear, you have been a terrible inconvenience. Look at you, filthy. You see what happens when you disobey? Come along, your punishment is long overdue. He took a step toward her. She is not going, Eli said. She is my wife, Stone said, his voice rising in anger. You have no say in this, you land-stealing. Jedediah, Clara whispered. He turned his full attention to her. That is right. Now come. You will not make a scene. Clara looked at the ground. She looked at Eli, his back to her, a solid wall. She looked at Jedediah Stone, his face smug, his hand already reaching for her. She saw the priest turning his back. She saw her father, smiling. She saw the whip. The trembling did not stop. It just turned into something else. It turned into rage. She took one step forward. You do not own me, she said. The words were not loud, but they were as clear as a gunshot in the high mountain air. Jedediah Stone stopped. His smile faded. He stared at her. This was not the girl he had bought. What did you say to me? Clara lifted her chin. The terror was still there, but the shame was gone. She met his eyes. "I said, you don't own me." Clara's words hung in the mountain air, thin and sharp as a shard of ice. "You don't own me." Jedediah Stone stared. His face, which had been a mask of smug ownership, froze. He looked at her as if a horse had just spoken to him. Then, a low, ugly laugh rumbled in his chest. "Child," he said, taking a step toward her, "you are hysterical. The cold has addled your mind." "Stay back," Eli said. He did not raise his voice. He did not move. He just was. The axe in his hand was still, but it was not at rest. Stone stopped. He looked at Eli. He looked at the axe. He looked at his 2 hired men, who were sitting on their horses, their rifles still in their scabbards, looking uncomfortable. They were paid to track a woman, not to fight a landowner with an axe. Stone was a man who understood property, and he understood power. He could see that brute force, right now, would be messy. He preferred the law. It was cleaner. "Fine," Stone said, his voice dropping its false politeness, turning hard and cold. "Fine. You want to be stubborn, squatter. You want to hide behind this thing. We will do this proper." He turned to one of his men. "Ride. Go to town. Find Sheriff Brody. Tell him I am here to claim my legal, wedded wife, as is my right, and that this man is holding her against her will and threatening me with violence. Go, now!" The man looked relieved to have an order. He nodded, wheeled his horse, and spurred it down the muddy track, disappearing into the pines. Then there was silence. A terrible, heavy, waiting silence. Jedediah Stone did not leave. He dismounted, slowly, and tethered his horse to a low-hanging branch. He crossed his arms, his fine black coat pulling tight. He was a patient man. He had waited months to find her. He could wait a few more hours. The other hired man stayed on his horse, a silent statue, his eyes on Eli. Eli did not lower the axe. He did not move from his spot. He was a wall between Stone and the cabin. Clara stood on the small porch. Her legs were shaking so hard she had to grip the door frame. But she did not go inside. She did not hide. She had said the words. She would stand by them. For hours, they waited. The sun crawled across the sky, a weak, pale disk that gave no warmth. The only sounds were the drip, drip, drip of the melting snow falling from the eaves and the impatient stamp of Stone's horse. It was late afternoon when they heard the horses. 2 riders. The hired man returned, and with him, a broad, tired-looking man with a graying mustache and a tin star pinned to a heavy wool coat. This was Sheriff Brody. Brody reined in, his eyes taking in the scene. Eli with the axe, the hired man with the rifle, Stone standing like he owned the place, and Clara on the porch, looking like a ghost. "Eli," Brody said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. He swung down from his horse. "Mr. Stone, what in God's name is this?" "Sheriff," Stone said, stepping forward. "All polite business." He pulled a folded paper from his breast pocket. "I am Jedediah Stone. I came to retrieve my wife, Mrs. Clara Stone. This is our marriage certificate, signed by Judge Miller in Illinois." Sheriff Brody took the paper. He unfolded it. He read it. He looked at the names. He looked at the seal. It was legal. "This woman," Stone continued, pointing at Clara, "ran from me on our wedding day. She is unwell, hysterical. This man," he waved a dismissive hand at Eli, "found her, kept her, and has now threatened me with an axe when I came to claim what is mine." Brody sighed. It was a long, deep sigh. The sound of a man who hated his job. He turned, his boots sinking into the mud, and walked toward Eli. "Eli, you know I cannot abide this. The law is the law. If this paper is real, she has to go with him." "It's real," Eli said, his voice flat, "but she's not going." "That ain't your choice, Eli." the sheriff said, his voice kind but firm. It's hers, and she already made it. She married him. He turned to Clara. Ma'am, Mrs. Stone, you have caused a lot of trouble. You need to pack your things. You need to go with your husband. This was it. This was the priest, turning his back. This was her father, smiling. This was the final wall of the cage sliding shut. Clara looked at the sheriff, the man of the law, the man who was supposed to help, and he was handing her over. She broke. It was not a cry, it was a shattering. No! The word was a scream, torn from her throat. No, I will not! I will not go back! She scrambled backward, her hands fumbling for the door. I will die first, she shrieked, her voice cracking. Do you hear me? I will die. I will throw myself off the mountain. I will not let him touch me. I will not. She collapsed onto the porch, her body curling into a small, tight ball. Her sobs so violent they were silent. She was just a shaking, terrified mass of gray wool. Sheriff Brody stopped. He looked at her. He looked at Jedediah Stone, whose face was a mask of cold fury at her display. He looked at Eli, who was watching Clara, his face carved from granite. See, Stone said, his voice slick. She is mad. She needs a doctor. She needs me. Eli had seen enough. The law had failed. He dropped the axe. The thud it made in the mud was final. He walked past the sheriff, past Stone, and onto the porch. He knelt beside Clara. He put a hand on her shaking back. Clara, he said. She flinched, but she did not pull away. He looked up at the sheriff. Brody, what if the marriage, what if it was not legal? Brody pinched the bridge of his nose. Eli, do not start. The paper is signed. What if it was not finished? Eli said. What if he forced her? Stone let out a roar. How dare you? That is a private matter. She is my wife. What we do is my business. Clara, her face still buried, whispered into the wood of the porch, but her voice was clear. He never I ran before he could. The sheriff looked sick. Ma'am, that may be grounds for an annulment, but that is a matter for a judge. That is a court order. I cannot just take your word over this paper. My hands are tied. She has to go with him until the circuit judge comes. The circuit judge came in the fall. It was spring. Eli stood up. He knew there was only one move left. It was desperate. It was, perhaps, insane. But it was the only one. No, Eli said. He looked at the sheriff. She ain't going, because I am going to marry her. The world stopped. Jedediah Stone let out a single, sharp laugh of disbelief. You cannot marry a married woman. You animal. Sheriff, arrest this man. He is mad. Brody, Eli said, his voice a low, steady rumble, ignoring Stone completely. You are the law in this county. That badge makes you a magistrate. You have the power. Eli, that is bigamy, the sheriff hissed, his face turning red. That is a crime. I cannot marry a woman who is already married. I will lose my badge. Let him take me to court, Eli said, jabbing a finger toward Stone. Let him prove his claim. Let him go to Durango and find a judge and file the papers. I'm not saying his paper ain't real. I am saying mine will be. She will be Mrs. Morgan. She will be on my land. And you know the law. Brody, a man has a right to defend his wife. A man has a right to defend his home. If he steps on this land again, I will shoot him for trespassing, and you will call it legal. Sheriff Brody stared. His mouth was open. It was a brilliant, wild, and incredibly dangerous move. It shifted everything. It took the law and turned it back on Stone. It created a legal nightmare. He said, that would take a judge months, maybe a year, to untangle. And in that year, Clara would be safe. Eli, Brody whispered, you are asking me to tear up the law. I am asking you to protect her. Look at her, man. Look at him. You know what he is. You know what you are sending her back to. Make a choice." Clara had pushed herself up. She was on her knees, listening to this. He was buying her, just like her father, just like Stone. He was using the law to claim her. She turned to Eli, her eyes wide with a new, different kind of terror. "Eli," she wept, her voice broken. "No, please, no." He looked at her, confused. This was the only way. "Clara, it is all I can think of." I cannot," she choked, shaking her head. "I do not want to be bought. I do not want to be traded. I am not a debt. I am not a piece of land." The words hit Eli harder than Stone's threats. He saw what he had done. In his haste to save her, he had treated her exactly like they had. He ignored the sheriff. He ignored Stone. He knelt in front of her again, in the mud, on the porch. He took her by the shoulders. His grip was firm, not violent. He made her look at him. "Clara, look at me." She met his eyes. They were not cold. They were not dead. They were fierce. "I am not buying you," he said, his voice so low, only she could hear it. "I am not trading for you. This is not about him. This is not about the law. This is not a debt." He took a breath. "You are a choice. You are my choice. Do you understand me? I am choosing you, and I am asking if you will choose me." She searched his face. He was not her father. He was not Stone. He was not a priest. Turning his back, he was the man who had cleaned her wound. He was the man who had held her while she cried. He was asking, not taking. The sobs stopped. She took a single shuddering breath. She nodded. Just once. Eli stood up. He turned to the sheriff. "Brody, marry us." Jedediah Stone lunged forward. "You will not! This is a mockery! I will have you all in chains! I will—" "Mr. Stone," the sheriff roared, his patience snapping. "You will be silent, or I will put you in chains, right now, for disturbing the peace. This is a contested matter. A deeply contested matter, and until the circuit judge can rule, I am acknowledging the residency of this woman." It was a flimsy, bureaucratic excuse, but it was the one he had. "Eli, Clara, stand up." They stood side by side, in the mud, in the middle of the yard, Eli in his rough wool shirt, Clara in her worn, gray dress. The sky above them was a cold, flat gray. A few wet snowflakes, the last breath of winter, began to fall. Stone and his hired man stood by their horses, forced to watch. Sheriff Brody took off his hat. He looked miserable. "I do not have a Bible," he muttered. "We do not need one," Eli said. "Right," Brody said. He cleared his throat. "Do you—" "Eli Morgan, take this woman. Clara, what is your family name?" "Girl." Clara looked at the mud. "I do not have one." "Her name is Clara," Eli said, his voice firm. "Fine," Brody sighed. "Do you, Eli Morgan, take this woman, Clara, to be your lawful wedded wife?" Eli turned. He did not look at the sheriff. He looked at Clara. "I do," he said. The sheriff turned to her. "And do you, Clara, do you take this man, Eli Morgan, to be your lawful wedded husband?" She looked at Eli. He was not smiling. He was just there, a mountain, a choice, a man who had seen her at her lowest and had not turned away. "I do," she whispered. "Then," the sheriff said, letting out a long breath, "by the power vested in me by the county of La Plata, I pronounce you man and wife. That is all." It was not joyful. There was no celebration. No one clapped. No one kissed. It was a defiant, desperate legal act. And for Clara, it was the first time she had ever felt free. Jedediah Stone was the color of a fresh bruise. This farce," he spat. "This means nothing. That paper is a lie." Sheriff Brody put his hat back on. He was the law again. "Mr. Stone, this woman is now Mrs. Clara Morgan. This is her home. You are on her property. You are trespassing. I am ordering you to leave now." "I will not," Stone roared. "She is mine." "Sharif," Eli said, his voice quiet. He had picked up his axe. "My wife and I would like this man off our land." Brody nodded. "Mr. Stone, you can file your complaint in Durango. The judge will hear it. But today you will leave, or I will arrest you." Stone looked at the sheriff. He looked at Eli and the axe. He looked at his hired man, who clearly wanted no part of this. He was beaten. For today. He walked to his horse, his movements stiff with rage. He climbed into the saddle. He pointed a shaking finger at Clara. "You," he seethed. "You think you have won. You think you are safe with this hermit. I will be back. I will come back with a court order. I will come back with a dozen men. I will burn this place to the ground, and I will drag you home by your hair. This is not over." "Go," Eli said. "And you," Stone snarled at Eli, "you will pay for this. I promise you." "Mr. Stone," the sheriff said, his voice like cold iron, "I would not come back. The court is slow. This is Mr. Morgan's land now. He has a right to defend it. The law is very clear on trespassing. Go home." Stone gave them one last look of pure hatred. He ripped the reins, spinning his horse, and dug his spurs in. He and his man galloped down the trail, disappearing into the trees. The sheriff watched them go. He sat on his horse, rubbing his jaw. "Eli, Clara, I bent the law today. Maybe I broke it." "You did what was right," Eli said. "Maybe." Brody said, "But he meant what he said. He is a rich man. He has influence. You be careful. You keep that rifle handy." "We will," Clara said, her voice quiet. The sheriff nodded. "Congratulations, I suppose." He turned his horse and, without looking back, trotted slowly down the path, leaving them alone. Eli and Clara stood in the yard. The snow was falling a little harder now, tiny white specks in the gray air. They were married. The adrenaline, the terror, the rage, it all drained out of Clara at once, leaving her so weak she swayed. Eli took her hand. His was calloused and warm. Hers was like ice. He did not say anything. He just led her inside the cabin and barred the door. That night was different. They sat by the fire. The threat was gone, but the echo of it remained. The wedding, if it could be called that, hung between them, awkward and unspoken. After a long time, Eli stood up. He walked to the bureau, the one with the locked drawer. He reached into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out the small, iron key. He walked back to Clara. She was sitting on her stool, watching him. He held the key out to her. It lay in the palm of his hand. She looked at the key, then at him. "What?" "It is yours now," he said. "The cabin, the everything, it is yours." Her hand trembled as she took the key. It was cold and heavy. This was his past. This was Sarah. This was Thomas. He was giving it to her. She walked to the bureau. Her hand shook so much she could barely fit the key in the lock. It clicked, a small, loud sound. She pulled the drawer open. There it was, the deep blue wool shawl, the small, worn Bible, and on top, the child's drawing. "Papa, Mama, Tom." She picked up the drawing. She looked at the clumsy stick figures. She felt a sudden, sharp pang, not of jealousy, but of shared loss. She was not replacing this woman. She was joining her. Eli stood behind her. He was watching her. He was not hiding. He was letting her see all of it. Clara gently folded the drawing. She placed it back on the shawl. She touched the soft wool. Just once. Then she pushed the drawer closed. She turned the key, locking it. Eli looked at her, confused. She walked back to him and held the key out. "No," he said, shaking his head. It is yours. It is ours, she said. She took his hand. It was large, rough. She placed the key in his palm and folded his own fingers over it, her small hands covering his. We lock it, she whispered, together. He looked down at their hands, covering the key. He understood. This was not about burying the past. It was about agreeing to carry it, together. He pulled her, gently. She did not resist. He wrapped his arms around her. This was not the desperate, broken clutching after the flood. This was not the polite distance of strangers. This was a man and a woman. It was a slow, quiet, and complete embrace. They stood in the middle of the small cabin, in the firelight, and held each other. They were not broken. They were not strangers. They were two survivors who had looked at the cold, empty world and had chosen, against all reason, to face it together. They were choosing love, not as a passion, but as a deliberate act of will. The news, of course, traveled. Sheriff Brody had to file a report. The hired man talked. Jedediah Stone, in his fury, told everyone in Durango who would listen. The story spread, from the general store to the saloons, to the sewing circles. Did you hear about Eli Morgan, the scarred recluse up on Stormy Peak? Took a wife, they say. Took her is right. Stole her, more like. Man named Stone, rich fella, came all the way from Illinois. Said she was his runaway bride. And what happened? Eli married her, right in the yard. Brody did it himself. Stone is screaming bloody murder, calling her a whore, calling Eli a thief. The whispers began. In the saloon, men laughed. Good for Eli. That Stone fella is all hot air. In the church, women whispered behind their fans. Shameless, a runaway, living with him alone for months. And now this, no better than she should be. But in the quiet corners of the town, among the other women, the ones who had come west, the ones who knew what loneliness was, the ones who knew what a bad marriage looked like, the whispers were different. A widow, buying flour at the general store, heard the story. She did not judge. She bought an extra sack of apples. A neighbor down the road, a woman who had lost her own child 2 winters back, heard it. She looked up at the mountain. Some judged, but others, quietly, supported. The story of the scarred cowboy and his runaway bride had begun. The marriage was a line drawn in the mud. On one side was winter, silence, and fear. On the other was spring. It came on slow. Then, all at once, the deep, sucking mud of the thaw firmed up. The gray-brown valley floor, which had looked dead for so long, blushed with a pale, hesitant green. The aspens, skeletal and gray, suddenly fuzzed with tiny, bright leaves. The roar of the meltwater calmed to a steady, companionable gurgle. The cabin changed. For 4 years, it had been a box to keep the cold out, a place to store grief. Now, Clara was letting the light in. She found a tin of whitewash, old and half-hardened, in the back of the barn. She mixed it with water and she painted the inside of the cabin. The dark, smoke-stained logs brightened, and the room felt twice as large. She took the heavy, moth-eaten blanket Eli used as a door for his cabinet, and she tore it down. She scrubbed the shelves. Eli watched her. He said nothing, but he did not stop her. He watched her one morning as she took a spade and walked to a patch of sun-drenched ground near the cabin. The ground was hard, full of rocks. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice rough. "I am planting a garden." She said, "Nothing grows here." He said it was a fact. "The soil is thin, the frost comes too early." "Things will grow," she said, plunging the spade into the dirt with all her strength. "We need vegetables." He watched her fight the earth for an hour, her thin arms, her stubborn back. She was trying to dig up a boulder. He let out a heavy sigh, went to the barn, and returned with his pickaxe. He did not speak, He walked past her, swung the pickaxe, and shattered the rock she had been struggling with. He began to break the earth, his shoulders working, turning the hard, mean soil into something soft. They worked all day. He broke the ground. She pulled the stones, her hands raw, piling them into a low wall. The next time he went to town, he came back with a sack of seed potatoes and small paper packets of bean, carrot, and onion seeds. He dropped them on the table. "Sheriff Brody's wife," he muttered, "said to tell you you plant these after the last full moon." Clara looked at the small, precious packets. She looked at him. He was looking away, his face stiff. She walked over to him. She stood on her toes, and she kissed his cheek. It was a small, dry, fast peck. Eli froze. He had not been touched like that, he could not remember. His hand went up to his cheek, where her lips had been, as if he had been stung. Clara smiled, grabbed the seeds, and ran back outside, her heart hammering. Eli stood there for a long time. Then, very slowly, his mouth, which had been set in a grim line for 4 years, twitched, the corners pulled up. It was a strange, rusty, unfamiliar movement. It was a smile. He found her later that day, looking at the barn. It was a sad, gray, weather-beaten thing. "It needs paint," she said. "It does not," he said. "It is a barn. It needs to hold hay." "It is ugly," she said. "I would like to paint it." "With what? There is no paint." "You bought paint in town. I saw the cans in the wagon." He had 3 big cans of dark red, meant to protect the wood. "That is for the fence." He lied. "The fence is fine," she said, looking him right in the eye. "The barn is sad. I want it to be red." "It is a waste," he grumbled. The next morning, she was out there with a brush. He watched her, this small woman, covered in red paint, trying to make something ugly into something beautiful. He went inside. He came back out, his face set in a grim mask of annoyance. He grabbed the other brush. "You are missing spots," he growled. They painted all day. They worked in silence, but it was a new silence. It was a shared, easy quiet. When the sun began to set, the entire front of the barn was a deep, rich, vibrant red. It looked alive. Clara stepped back, her hands on her hips, her face smudged with paint. "There," she said, satisfied. "Now it looks like a home." Eli looked at the red barn. He looked at his wife, her hair coming loose, a streak of red on her nose, and he smiled again. This time, it reached his eyes. The whispers in town had not died down. They had settled. Clara had not gone to town. She was afraid of the stairs, afraid of the pointing fingers, afraid of running into someone who knew Jedediah Stone. One afternoon, she was weeding her new, tiny garden, pulling up the first stubborn weeds. Eli was mending a harness on the porch. A wagon rattled up the trail. Clara shot to her feet. Her heart went cold. Eli was instantly on his feet, his hand moving toward the rifle that was always leaning against the doorframe. It was not Jedediah Stone. It was a small, buckboard wagon, driven by a woman. She was alone. She was dressed in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She pulled the wagon to a stop. She looked at Eli. She looked at Clara. Her face was nervous. "Mrs. Morgan?" the woman called out. Her voice was thin, but clear. Clara stepped forward. "Yes?" "My name is Martha Abbott," the woman said. My homestead is down the valley, about 5 miles. My husband, he passed 2 years back." She was a widow. "I heard," "Mrs." Abbott said, her hands twisting in her lap. "I heard you set up a home here." Clara waited. "Mrs." Abbott pointed to the bed of her wagon. There was a small, cloth-covered basket. I was baking. I made too much. Apple. My William, he was partial to apple." She was holding out a pie. It was not just a pie. It was a welcome. It was a secret alliance. It was a woman, bypassing the talk of the men and the judgment of the church, and making a connection. Clara walked slowly to the wagon. She looked at the woman. Mrs. Abbott's eyes were kind, worn, but kind. "Thank you, Mrs. Abbott," Clara said, her voice thick. That is the kindest thing." "It is a hard life up here," Mrs. Abbott said, her eyes flicking to Eli, who stood watchful on the porch, and then back to Clara. "It is hard, to be alone. It is good not to be." She handed the pie to Clara. Their hands touched. You have a good hand with paint, child," she said, nodding at the bright red barn. "It looks cheerful." She clucked to her horse and, with a nod, turned the wagon and rattled back down the trail. Clara stood holding the pie. It was still warm. She looked at Eli. He looked as stunned as she felt. They had a neighbor. "The mail carrier, a young man on a mule, came by once a month. When he stopped, blowing his horn, Clara's heart leaped. She had sent one letter, weeks ago, to her sister, Emily, in Illinois. She had told her, simply, that she was alive, that she was safe, that she was married to a good man. The mail carrier handed her a single, thin envelope. It was her sister's handwriting. She took it inside the cabin. Eli was outside, skinning rabbits. She sat at the table, her hands shaking, and broke the seal. "Clara," it began. There was no dearest. "Your letter arrived. We had all believed you dead. We prayed for your soul. It seems we were praying for the wrong thing." Clara's breath caught. "You have shamed us. You have brought a disgrace upon our family that we can never wash away. You defied your father. You abandoned your husband, a good, wealthy man who was willing to take you without a dowry, and now this. You write that you are married to some trapper, some mountain hermit, living in sin. You have made your choice. You are no sister of mine. Father has forbidden your name to be spoken in this house. Do not write to us again. We are respectable. You have chosen your life. May God have mercy on your soul." The letter fell from her hands. It was a final, cold, sharp cut, the last thread to her old life. She had thought, in some small, foolish part of her heart, that her sister would be happy, that she would understand. She had been disowned. She was truly, finally, an orphan. She sat there, frozen, as the silence of the cabin pressed in on her. She was nothing. She had no family. She had no home. Eli came in, the skinned rabbits in his hand. He saw her face. He saw the letter on the floor. He did not ask. He did not speak. He just walked to the fireplace. He stirred the embers. He added a small, dry log. Clara watched him, his broad back, his steady hand. She stood up. Her legs felt weak. She bent down and picked up the letter. She read it one more time, the cruel, pious words. Then she walked to the fireplace. Eli moved aside. She held the letter over the small, growing flames. She let it go. She watched the paper curl, turn brown, and then ignite. The words of her sister, the judgment of her father, the ghost of her old life, it all turned to black, floating ash. She turned to Eli. He was watching her, his face full of a quiet understanding. "This is my home now," she said. Her voice was not sad. It was not angry. It was a vow. "You are my family." He held out his hand. She took it. The summer was hot and dry. The green of spring faded to a brittle gold. The creek shrank. The wind, when it came, was not a relief. It was a hot, scouring breath that picked up the dust from the valley floor and flung it against the red barn. "Dry wind," Eli said one afternoon, looking at the sky. "Fire weather." It came 2 days later. Clara was in her garden, which was small but thriving. She was picking beans when she smelled it. Smoke. It was not the wood smoke of their cabin. It was the thick, acrid, wrong smell of a wild, hungry fire. She ran to the edge of the clearing. Eli was already there, on the porch, staring south, down the valley. A thick, roiling column of black and gray smoke was rising from the ridge about 3 miles down. It was near the Henderson place, a family with 4 small children. "Eli," she breathed. "It is Henderson's," he said. The wind was blowing toward them. "It is in the trees, and the wind is high." He did not hesitate. He ran to the barn, grabbed his axe, and 2 empty water buckets. "Clara, soak the blankets. All of them. Get them on the roof, on the north side." "What are you doing?" she cried. "I am going to Henderson's. You stay here. You keep the roof wet. If the embers catch—" "No," she said. She grabbed 2 buckets herself. "I am coming with you. They have children. Mrs. Henderson, she cannot. I am coming." He looked at her small, determined face. He knew he could not stop her. And he knew, deep down, he did not want to. He could not do this alone. "Stay close," he growled, "and stay low." They ran. It was not a run. It was a desperate, choking scramble. They ran down the trail, the smoke growing thicker, burning their lungs. Ash began to fall, like a gray, hot snow. They broke through the trees into the Henderson clearing, and it was a vision from hell. The house was safe, for now. But the barn was a tower of flames. The wind was whipping the fire into a frenzy, sending sparks and embers in a shower onto the dry grass, which was catching, creating small new fires all around the yard. Mr. Henderson was on the roof of his house, throwing buckets of water. Mrs. Henderson was on the ground, screaming, trying to hurt her 3 small children who were crying in terror. "Sss, the horses!" Mr. Henderson shouted, his voice hoarse. "They are still in the barn. And then William, my boy, he ran in. He ran in to get his dog." Mrs. Henderson let out a sound that was not human. Eli did not pause. He looked at Clara. "The children. Get them to the creek bed. Get them low. Get them wet. And keep them there." He handed her a bucket. "Eli, no!" she screamed, seeing him look at the barn. "Eli, you cannot!" The roof of the barn was starting to groan. "Clara, go!" he roared. She froze. He was a stranger again, a man of violence and action. He was the man who had come back from the war. He turned to the barn. He grabbed a horse blanket that was in the yard, plunged it into the water trough, and threw it over his head. He picked up his axe. "Eli!" she screamed again. He ran. He disappeared into the wall of black smoke and orange fire. Clara's terror was a cold, solid thing in her chest. She wanted to follow him. But the children— She looked at Mrs. Henderson, who was frozen. Watching the barn, she looked at the 3 crying children. She ran. She grabbed the smallest girl, hoisted her onto her hip. "Come with me!" she yelled at the other 2. "Now, run, to the creek!" She slapped Mrs. Henderson hard. "Mary, the children, help me!" The slap broke the spell. Mary Henderson grabbed her other 2 children, and together they ran, stumbling, to the shallow, muddy creek bed, away from the smoke. Clara plunged her skirt into the water and threw it over the children's heads. "Stay down! Do not look up!" She turned back to the fire. The sound was a roar, and then a crash. The main beam of the barn had given way. The whole structure caved in on itself, sending a volcano of sparks and cinders into the sky. Clara screamed his name. "Eli!" He was gone. He was in there. He was gone. She stood up, ready to run into the fire, ready to die. And then she saw him. He staggered out of the smoke. He was not a man. He was a black, smoking shape. The blanket was on fire. He threw it off. He was carrying something. A small body, the boy, William. And under his other arm, a small, whimpering dog. He took 3 steps into the clearing and collapsed, face down, in the dirt. Clara ran. She did not know her feet were moving. She flew across the yard, ignoring the heat, the cinders. She fell to her knees beside him. "Eli! Eli!" He was unconscious. The boy, William, was coughing, but he was alive. Mary Henderson ran from the creek and snatched her son up, crying, thanking God. Clara only saw Eli. His shirt was gone, burned from his back. His skin was a raw, red map of burns. A piece of wood, a small, charred rafter, was protruding from his left shoulder, high up, near his neck. "Eli," she whispered, her hands shaking so hard she could not touch him. Mr. Henderson was off the roof, his face black. We have to move him." Together, they lifted him. Eli moaned, a low, deep sound of pure agony. They carried him to the house, which was, for now, safe. They laid him on the kitchen table, and the vigil began. Clara worked. The shock, the terror, it all burned away, leaving a cold, clear, terrible calm. "Boil water," she said to Mr. Henderson. "Get me clean rags and whiskey." She looked at the wound. The wood was deep. I have to pull it out," she said. Mary Henderson, clutching her son, started to sob. He saved my boy. "Mary, be quiet," Clara said. Her voice was not her own. It was hard as iron. "Hold him down." Mr. Henderson put his weight on Eli's good shoulder. Clara took a deep breath. She grabbed the end of the charred wood, and she pulled. Eli's body arched off the table with a silent, terrible scream. His eyes flew open. They were blind with pain. He did not see her. The wood came free, blood, dark and thick, welled up. Clara took the whiskey and poured it directly into the wound. Eli screamed again, and then, mercifully, he passed out. She bandaged him. She tended his burns. She worked all night. The wind died down. The fire burned itself out, leaving a smoking black scar on the land. Mr. Henderson put out the last of the embers. The house was safe. Clara sat in a chair by the kitchen table. Eli was breathing. It was shallow. He was burning with fever. She sat and she waited. She put cool, wet rags on his forehead. She whispered to him. She did not know what she was saying, just his name, over and over. Eli, Eli. Toward dawn, his fever spiked. He began to thrash, just as she had done in the cabin, so long ago. He was not in the fire. He was somewhere else. "Sarah!" he cried out, his voice hoarseness. "Sarah, I am here. I am home. Hold on. Tommy, I am too late." He was lost in his guilt. He was dying in that cold cabin. 4 years ago. Clara grabbed his hand, his good hand. She held it tight. "No," she whispered. "No, Eli, you are not too late. I am here." He fought her, his mind lost in the fever. "Please," she wept, her cold calm finally breaking. She put her head down on his chest, her tears falling on his burned skin. "Please, Eli, do not leave me." She said it again. "Please do not leave me. I cannot be alone again. Please." She was not his debtor. She was not his wife by law. She was his. He was hers, and he was leaving her. "Do not leave me." She fell asleep like that, her head on his chest, her hand clutching his. She woke to a hand in her hair. It was gentle, weak. She lifted her head. Eli was awake. The fever was gone. His eyes were clear. They were weak and full of pain, but they were his. He was looking at her. "Clara," he whispered. His voice was a dry rasp. "I am here," she cried, tears of relief streaming down her face. "I am here." He looked at her face, smudged with soot, her hair a wild mess, her eyes red from weeping. He had heard her, in the fog, in the fever. He had heard her words, "Please do not leave me." He had been a dead man for 4 years. He had been a ghost in his own life. But this woman, who had wept for him, who had pulled fire from his shoulder, who had painted his barn, she had seen him. She had chosen him. A small, weak smile touched his chapped lips. "Clara," he rasped again. He lifted his good hand, his thumb brushing the tear from her cheek. "I love you." The words hung in the quiet kitchen. They were so simple, so quiet, and they were everything. Clara's breath hitched. She had never heard those words. Not from her father, not from her sister. She had never... She could not speak. She just took his hand, kissed his rough knuckles, and pressed it to her cheek. She was home. He survived. The healing was slow. It was a long week at the Hendersons, and then a slow, painful wagon ride back to their own cabin. Clara tended him. She changed his bandages. She fed him broth. She was his strength. And he let her see him weak. He let her care for him. For Eli, this was harder than running into the fire. The summer faded into a warm, golden autumn. His burns healed, leaving new, shiny scars on his back. To match her own, his shoulder was stiff, but it worked. He was quieter. The hard, angry edge of him was gone. He had faced his worst fear, fire and loss, and he had not run. He had saved the child he could not save before. He was, finally, at peace. One morning, the air was crisp, tasting of apples and winter. The garden was done. Clara had harvested the last of the potatoes and carrots. She went out to the small patch of wildflowers that grew on the ridge. She picked a handful, bluebells and yellow asters. Eli watched her from the porch. He did not ask. She walked, not to the cabin, but to the small stand of pines behind it, the place he never went. She stood in front of the 2 small, rough crosses. They were gray, worn by 4 winters. There were no names, just the wood. She knelt in the pine needles. She was not afraid. She was not trespassing. She divided the flowers. She laid a small bunch at the base of the first cross. "Sarah," she whispered, I do not know you, but I know he loved you. He loved you so much. He died with you." She laid the other bunch at the small cross. "Thomas," she said, her voice thick, He never forgave himself for not being here." She sat back on her heels. The sun was filtering through the pines. I am not trying to take your place," she said to the silent graves. I want him to be happy. He has been so sad. For so long." She touched the rough wood of Sarah's cross. "Thank you," she whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. "Thank you for letting him live again. I will take good care of him. I promise." She stayed there for a long time. She said her piece. When she stood up, Eli was there. He was standing at the edge of the trees, watching her. His face was not angry. It was not sad. It was open. He held out his hand. She walked to him, and she took it. He did not look at the graves. He looked at her. They turned, and as the sun began to rise, painting the valley in gold and red, Clara and Eli walked back to the cabin. They walked, hand in hand, no longer 2 broken people, no longer haunted by the ghosts of what they had lost. They were, at last, whole. Thank you so kindly for listening to our story tonight around the campfire. We would love for you to comment with where you are listening from, so we can all connect with one another. Please subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel and let us know what you thought.